Welcome back to Beyond the Headline, everyone. I'm really excited that you're with us today because I'm here with Micah Rosenbloom, a managing partner at Founder Collective. Micah, thank you for being here.
Hey, Jenna, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Can we start out, Micah, with an insight that you and Scott Belsky discussed in one of your podcasts, actually?
Thanks for listening to our podcast.
The zone of optimum impact, which he's also previously called your sweet spot of your skills and your passions coming together. Where do you feel your zone of optimum impact is?
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I think I have optimum impact in sort of industries that are a little less sexy. I think I've spent most of my career in things like home cleaning, bringing technology to house cleaners and carpet cleaners and food safety and dental. We built a whole digital workflow system, like a CAD CAM system for dentists. And maybe I'm the tallest midget, but I've liked, to be in industries where I felt like I wasn't competing with 10 other, tech startups with tens of millions of dollars. And then kind of really building a great team around it. I think I've always been a really good cheerleader and a really good builder of teams. I'm never the expert. And I think, I've really believed in the adage of hire people who are smarter than you and raise your game. And so I think that intersection of industries that are a little under the radar, opportunities that are a little under the radar, with really great teams is, I don't know if it's an unfair advantage, but it's definitely an area where I feel at least, I feel at least it's worth taking the swing. And I've applied that to investing. I mean, I think if you look at some of the investments I've done, Transfix is, two guys, one out of the trucking freight business, brokerage business, who's basically bringing, sort of mobile app technology to match available trucks with loads that need to be carried around the country. Now it's sexy, right? Like all these markets at some point, but there have been journal articles and stuff. But a year ago or 2 years ago when we made the investment, people were like, trucking? Like, truckers don't. And actually it was interesting, what really moved me, and two things. One is I'm, coming to this point of your unique insight. Drew had great founder business fit. Drew had grown up in the trucking business, in the freight brokerage business. He had a vision for how technology could change his industry. But the other thing that he told me that I won't forget is he said, I always ask why now, why in this moment? And he said, truckers are watching Netflix, like when they're driving.
That was a little alarming.
Yeah, right? It's pretty scary. But he was like, there's Wi-Fi in all these cabs. There wasn't Wi-Fi. They didn't have smartphones like even a couple years ago. But now they all have Wi-Fi. And it was like, you just don't know that if you're not in that industry. So anyway.
I'm glad that you shared Transfix as the first example because you guys have said before that your belief at Founder Collective is that your next great opportunity can come from anyone in virtually any industry.
That's right. I mean, we were, we've been really fortunate. We were seed investors in Uber. And I vaguely remember my partner who led the deal, I wasn't even a full-time investor then, saying to another one of my partners, we'll either do that or there's this enterprise software company, but we should only do one. They're both kind of crazy. Meanwhile, the enterprise software company has failed. Uber was having trouble fundraising. I mean, they had pitched a lot of people. Travis hadn't joined yet. I remember saying, and even to this day, that the black car business is kind of a dirty industry. It's pretty corrupt. It's, very controlled by a few oligopolies. Like, who would want to deal with that? We had actually had a friend who tried to bring credit cards into the yellow cab business, and that took forever. None of this was obvious until, they started growing really quickly. And I think even sometimes for the founders, it's not obvious. Like, I think even the founders are surprised when you really hit product market fit, how things can go. So.
And when it comes to that mentality of even you as the investor being like, I don't know where this is going to go. You've discussed previously that you love the deals that you're thinking about on the weekend because maybe the founder gave you some homework or you're just thinking like, how is this going to work? I've got to research it. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a risky way to think about, but we invested in this company called Move With, which is sort of like Airbnb. I hate to always use it's this for that, but it's a good way to communicated quickly. It's Airbnb for fitness classes. So these fitness instructors who, have kind of risen the ranks of the New York sports or Boston sports clubs or the Equinoxes, who are thinking about going out on their own. It's actually hard to you need physical space. So what these guys do is they match you with physical space and allow you to create a class on their platform. So for example, I did one in San Francisco 2 weeks ago at Alamo Square Park, this beautiful park overlooking the bay, and we did a boot camp. And this guy, it's actually not, he's a technology guy, but during the mornings and evenings, he runs boot camps because he's into it and it generates a little extra dough. And the class was awesome. Like he brought cables and we were, running up and down stairs and it was great. And, like on the weekends, I'm often thinking about, that would be cool. Like it'd be really cool to do a class there. Or like, or I see like a running club run by and I'm like, the platform would be great. So like, I'm thinking about it in a way of like, again, it could be dangerous to have your investor think about products or features for your, but it's really engaged me. I don't know if the company will end up being the billion-dollar company I hope I think it can be, but I'm excited about it. Like it really, and again, the danger that I talk about is like a lot of investors talk about things they use but won't invest in, and this is definitely in the category of something I would use and I want to invest in because I believe in it. But it's the kind of thing that I really believe should exist, and it gets me thinking about it a lot. When I'm walking around, I'm thinking about how could it apply here or there. And it's funny. I mentioned over the summer I learned to surf a couple years ago, and I took my 8-year-old to a surf instructor class so we could go out together. And I texted the founder Holly of Move With, and I said they should totally do surf classes on like the platform. And a month ago she texted me, "You got your wish. There's finally surf classes on the platform," and that was very satisfying, both as an investor and a user.
I want to take a couple of minutes, Micah, and discuss the transition from startup to VC. You've raised capital as a founder before. What do you wish you would have known now that you're a VC?
How crazy it is. I would swear, but I don't think you're allowed to do that here. But how effing crazy it is. I mean, I think you don't understand the motivations of investors. You either have a really negative view or maybe an overly glorified view of investors. And, I don't think I understood, like, how does their fund size impact the way they think? How does their LP base? How many partners they have and where their standing is in the partnership? I don't think I really understood. I mean, not that you need to spend, hours and hours worrying about this stuff, but just to sort of contextualize who you're taking money from and how they're going to think about your future and the company's future. And I think now that I'm on this side, I have a much better appreciation for, and of course it's my business, but like, why does that investor think that investment is great? And it's like, well, because that investor needs to put $20 million to work. And why do those investors never do that? And like, well, they had bad experience in that category, a lot of it's just sort of human nature and human stuff. But I don't think I understood or appreciated the importance of the motivations and incentives behind the investors. I just sort of raised money, and whoever would come in, and like you loved the people who would come in because they came in. In a lot of ways, though, having said all this, naivete is a good thing, and I think in some ways this is why companies get started by 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and maybe not 50-year-olds. There are exceptions, but many exceptions. But I think part of it is because if you started thinking through all the things that could go wrong, you can talk yourself out of everything. And a little bit of naivete. When we started Handshake, we didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't even know the difference. I didn't know what cost of customer acquisition was. I didn't know what lifetime value was. I didn't know why you didn't just hire other 20-year-olds to run your company. Like I made every mistake in the book. But it's sort of this healthy mix of naivete and awareness. I don't know where the right balance is, but a lot of people told us when we built our dental company. I mean, I have the pass emails still from people who are like, "I've tried to sell stuff in dental. You can't sell technology to dentists. That is the worst market on earth. You are going to fail," basically, paraphrasing. And I think we were naive enough to believe we would be different. And I think we were a little bit different. I think we were kind of we were refreshing to the industry. But there's not room for but in general, the people who passed weren't wrong. We were just the exceptions. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for exceptional businesses that kind of defy the rules.
On the side of the balance of naivete and awareness. For that awareness, what are some questions that you think founders should ask VCs?
I mean, I think founders should definitely talk to other founders that have been funded by the VCs, particularly ones that have had trouble. Like, the best thing to talk to is like the company that failed, and then, call up that CEO and say, how did the VC behave? Like, what kind of feedback were you getting? Tell me about sort of the end, and was the VC even to be found? Because you see a big disparity between, a lot of VCs who just sort of focus on their top 10%. I think, and honestly, we sometimes say to each other, like, maybe we're misallocating our time, but we probably spend as much time, more time on the companies that are struggling, because those are the companies that need help. Companies that are doing well, they're kind of, on autopilot. Like, I mean, they're doing their thing, we stay out of the way. So we probably spend a disproportionate amount of time on companies that need help, that have struggles, and most companies do at one point or another. But I think really founders should ask from companies that have struggled, not just the good ones. Because it's like success has many fathers, failure is an orphan, right? So like, I think it's important to figure out who stands by the companies when there are struggles. I think the other thing to really understand is, what is the strategy of the fund, and really just get to know. It's kind of silly, but I'm a believer in like the beer or the coffee or the meal with your investor. Like, there's something about getting out of the office in the diligence process that is disarming, and I think is a way for you to understand, what is this person really like, and what are they like when they're not surrounded by a conference room or their partners or associates. And so I encourage founders to do that. I try to do that with companies I'm talking to. It's hard. We're busy, and we have personal lives too. But you're going to spend. It's kind of like investing in a company or taking money from someone is kind of like getting married. I mean, it's every bit. You're going to spend a ton of time with them, and it's every bit as important as making a hire, right? It's like a hiring process, and so I think you can't speed date, and that means not only business meetings or professional settings, but I think also getting to know someone outside the office, even if briefly. I also always, before we make an investment, go to the office of the company we're looking at. I just such a believer that I can tell the vibe, right? You can, and not just me, but like you can walk into Google and get a feel for it. You can walk into Microsoft and you can walk into a startup and get a feel for what is that culture. Like, are people writing on the walls, or like, how are people dressed? How loud is it? Is it in open cubes, or is it offices? In New York, is it in Midtown or is it downtown? It says so much about the company's culture, and not that there's one culture that's right. We've invested in companies in Winnipeg, Canada, and we've invested companies in Soho, New York. It's just you just need a flavor for what is unique about that company, and I get a lot of that by showing up.
And I think of all of those efforts that your team places in really getting to know a founder has led to what you've shared, you guys often being the first call when something is going wrong. And I think that says a lot about your commitment.
Yeah, or we're like AAA, like we'll come tow you. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's also, some of it is just structural and strategic. So I think this is why I think you have to understand what the strategy of the fund is. Our strategy is to not follow on beyond Series A. We are truly a seed fund, so we're not buying options. And I think that's one of the big distinctions that a lot of people don't understand, is that when larger funds are doing early rounds, they're essentially buying options. They're saying, we're going to put in a little now to make a decision. Can we put in a lot? Because the little actually won't move the needle. If I invest $1 million, and even if you have a 10x return and I return 10, but the fund is 500 million, it doesn't matter. It's pretty insignificant. Obviously, if you're a smaller fund, it does matter, like us. But for us, because we're not investing in the Series B and beyond, and we're just we'll do our pro rata in the A. I think we're viewed as more objective. You don't have to sell us. You've already sold us. Like, that process is over. So now it's a question of what's going on and how can we fix it or deal with it. And so I mean, I'd love to say it's because everyone loves Eric, Dave, and Micah Gore. Like, I think that's part of it, hopefully, but I think it's also structural. Like, I think it's easy to think of VC as just making great investments. And I actually think some people really do view it. But just like a business, every VC has a different strategy. And some strategies will work and some won't. And some of it has to do with the time of the markets. But you have to understand what is the strategy of that fund. And our strategy is to get in early and then get out. Get not sell, but basically get out of the way. We're not doing later stage investments for this very reason. And we keep the fund small for this reason. But I think that gives us objectivity and neutrality where other investors, I always felt like you are always selling a board. If you have a board of big VCs, you are always selling. Make no mistake. So
I'm glad that you mentioned that because you have a great post from, I think, this summer.
Boy, you've really read my stuff.
This summer about optionality. And when I first read the title, I was like, oh, they're going to talk about options. Then right away, you were like, this is what we're not going to talk about. And it was so beneficial for me because the way you worded it, saying that it's a difference between asking for permission versus proactively deciding. Can you dive into that a little bit?
You'll have to remind me because this summer was so long ago. With respect to VC,
with respect to what happens actually when you take VC money and how that influences your ability to make decisions.
Yeah, right. Thanks for reminding. I should remember the stuff I write better. Huh? No, I remember, and a lot of these are triggered by my own experiences. So I think the temptation to raise money, especially now in the market where there's a lot of capital, is it's almost a validation of your business when you get money, and yet your options become fewer. It's this funny dynamic. So for example, when you're still figuring out a business and you haven't taken any capital, you can decide to walk away. If Google comes and says, we want to give you this great job, and that's what you want to do, you could do it. If you want to move to San Diego because you're sick of the damn cold, and you've got a co-founder and he or she doesn't want to move, but it wasn't working out anyway, you could just do it. That's it. Get on the plane and go to San Diego. Doesn't sound bad, actually. And I think all those types of options get way more complicated when you take money. You have to justify that. Not so easy to move a company once you've taken venture capital because there would be a lot of expectations, and are you distracted? You can't just stop a company. Pivoting, yes, it's become more common, but you really can only do that once before you lose a lot of credibility. So I think people underestimate how much freedom. Now, look, a lot of stuff takes money. There's no other way to do it. But the more you bootstrap, the more you can bootstrap, the more you can figure out, and the more flexibility you have. And I think, even in terms of selling, or exiting, once you take capital, like that small exit has kind of gone away. Like you're sort of on a track where your investors assume. So you raise $1 million. Now you can only sell the company, not to say you couldn't sell it for 3, but your investors want 10. But what if the business is only worth 3? And that would make you really happy. And that's a load of money. So I think the glorification of fundraising as the validation is a little bit misplaced because, I think in the end, people are disappointed that they felt more boxed in than they thought. They thought the money was going to help them, kind of create options, and it does at some level, but it also takes many away.
How about, Micah, for you as a founder, what are some of the hard lessons that you learned?
From when I was a founder? Yeah, I think, the biggest thing, I talk about this a lot, but I always get a smile when I say this from other founders. I say, I bet in the last hour your day has gone like this. And I bet in a single phone call, and they're like, exactly. And that's the big difference between founding a company and any other job. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. It's sort of like raising a child or something as impactful on your life. And I think even in a given day, you go up and down, and a lot. And I think in venture, I think in working for big corporate America, the highs aren't quite as high. The amplitude of the waves is, I think it's amplitude. I can't remember. Of the waves isn't as strong. And so It's just a little more balanced. And yet, I think you get addicted to those highs and lows. Like sometimes I miss them because I'm like, it's such a rush when you like sell that big account. It's almost like, it's one thing when you do it at a big company, you're like, woo, I'm going to make my number. But like when it's your company, you're like, I'm going to survive. Like this is my future. Like, but how you deal with that, I think, is something that like you have to learn. Really, it's really hard. Personally, I actually remember going to the doctor once and being told I had high blood pressure and I wasn't even 30 yet, or I might have just turned 30, and I was like, geez, like can't believe that. And it was purely based on work, and so I think, how do you deal with those highs and lows? How do you surround yourself with people who can kind of counterbalance you? I think that's a real challenge of the startup life. And I talked to a lot of founders. We're now at the point where our first fund was started in 2009. So we're now 6 years in, and I'm hearing, and I actually totally get it. Doesn't bother me at all. A couple of founders who have kind of from the early companies saying, I'm tired. It's been I'm taking a vacation in 5 years. Companies that, by the way, have done amazingly well. But those 5 years are like 30 years somewhere else. I mean, it's they use the dog analogy, but it's true. Like, and when they say it, I'm like, I get it. Like, and that's when people start saying, like, should we bring someone in, or should we, bring in a COO, or should we sell the company? Like, it's a grind. I mean, I think Zuckerberg, I look at him and what he's done at Facebook, and I'm like, that is so rare, to be able to take a company from the dorm to public company and still going. And I bet he's, I bet there'll be a long vacation in there. I'm sure there've been some, but like, that is a tough grind. I can only imagine. And he is one has to really appreciate what he's done.
Glad that you mentioned the immense amount of time that founders are dedicating, because you don't really see that on the outside. And it's another insight that came up in your interview with Scott, that we just kind of forget the middle of the journey, and we only celebrate what comes. Oh, you raise money. Oh, you made this big hire, but you're working on this every day.
Right. No, totally. The middle is the irate customer and making that. I mean, I dealt with, more of my day if I remember to the middle of my operating days, it was customer service stuff and managing people. Like, that's most of what you're doing every day. The customer in Seattle, the system's frozen. It's a second system. Should we send someone out there? Who should we send? Is it worth it? All that stuff. Like, that's like, a lot of stuff. And, that employee is upset at that employee because, that team, because they feel like engineering should have fixed it, but engineering thought they fixed, like that, refereeing that stuff is the middle, and no one talks about it. It's not that no one talks about it, but it's just no one wants to, like, that's what businesses are made of, those kinds of decisions, right? And I think, a little bit of the cult or the mythology of the founder is like the Steve Jobs, right? The visionary idea guy. But I think a lot of startups are built on blocking and tackling. And in fact, a lot of times when people would talk and be like, "You're such an entrepreneur" or whatever, I'd say, "I'm really an entrepreneurial manager." Like, or they would sort of confuse inventor with entrepreneurial and say, like, I'm really like my job is to figure out how to take like great talent and great ideas and make them actually happen. I'm not necessarily like the visionary who's like, aha, a phone with no buttons. Like, I don't think I would have come up with that. I would have been like, how do you talk? Like, you need a button. But there are people who do that, and I think we celebrate and often confuse. I mean, I hear it even in my own like conversations with family and friends. They're like, I have an idea. And so the myth of entrepreneurship is ideas and vision, and that's certainly a big part of it. But it's like that primordial goop of like actually making a business. That, yeah, it's not as interesting, and yet it's where 80%. It's like all for as amazing as what Travis or the Airbnb guys, or like, they're day in, day out, they're doing the kind of stuff I just described. They're dealing with, aside from the like great satisfaction of building their business and press and all that. It's a lot of blocking and tackling and making hard decisions every day, and probably not sleeping very well thinking about those decisions, or getting pinged with, I'll never forget, like when we launched Brontes, which was this dental company we built, and we launched a product overseas. All night long I got email, all day long I got email from, our office in Boston and sort of US sales team. And all night long was Europe and Asia dealing with problems there. There was never, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I had checked that time my BlackBerry. It was streamed, and it was all the same stuff I dealt with during the day, just happening in another market. So there was no rest for the weary.
I'm so happy that you mentioned it in that way and used the analogy of a referee, because you're watching everything happening. You have to look at so many different places on the field. And then on top of that, you're the one who actually has to make the decision. And a lot of times other people aren't going to be happy with your decision. How did you deal with that mental debt?
Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, I think one of the tricks of being a great manager is not necessarily, I was talking about this in the context of a volunteer organization that my wife and I are involved in, and that some people are micromanaging. They have to be in every meeting. And I think the trick to great managers is you actually don't have to be in every meeting, and you really do. And people say it, but it's true. You bring the right people on the bus and you empower them. And then what you do is you just ask them good questions. When you have your one-on-ones or when you are in those meetings, you don't say this is how it should be, but you just ask a lot of tough questions, and you get good at knowing what questions to ask. So I like to think that the majority of the time it wasn't me being or any of my senior team being heavy and saying this would have to be. That does happen from time to time, but for the most part it was the realization I'd rather have the team come to that. So for example, if a lot of times it was around not being able to spend money or not being able to hire, right? That's often and rather than being the one saying, guys, unfortunately, the budget doesn't allow us to add 2 staff to the customer service team. Instead, you'd rather have the head of customer service say, look, I've been staring at the budget for the last, whatever. And while I think we're going to have to find another way to scale the team because we can't afford to add those people. I'd rather it end up there, and I'd work hard to try to, and I think good operators work hard to try to get it there, to try to get other people to come to the answer, because it's too hard to be the one always. First of all, it's hard to have all the information. It's also, you don't want to be running around the organization saying no. And frankly, when you do feel that way, you often use other people like your CFO or COO to kind of say no for you. But I think it goes back to building structure and building culture where everybody feels ownership. I remember actually my partner Eric, I'll give him credit for saying this, but I use it a lot. Every dollar we spend is a dollar of dilution. So think about, you own this much, and every time we spend money, you own a little bit less, because we're taking those dollars, that the venture capital, we either got raised more or we're burning the ones we have, and so we're all diluting. So every time, so the more
What a great way to put it.
The less we spend, the more of this company we own, and the more we own, the more we'll all have at the end. And so it's a good way for people to think, like every time I ask for someone, I'm not just asking some corporate. But I'm not just asking for budget we already have. We actually have to make it. We actually have to dilute ourselves to have it. And I think it's a way for employees to feel like not just employees, but like owners. How do you make everyone feel like an owner? That's what's so great about a startup is at the end, everyone should feel like an owner. Everyone should feel like it's not just a job. Let me tell you what happened at work today. But let me tell you what we're building, Jenna. Let me tell you about it was frustrating, but we're getting there. And it sort of becomes more like if job is 20% of who you are for the average American, or I don't know what it is, I'm making this up. But I think for a startup person, it's 80, it's a 100%. Real part. It's 110%. It's unfortunately, a lot of people in startups don't have a lot of hobbies. And you ask them so what are you about? Jenna, what are you doing? You're like, let me tell you about my company,
Exactly.
And you can't do that for your whole life. I do think a lot of things gets in the way of that. But for the period of life that you're working in startups, it really is that all-consuming.
I love it, and I think that's such a great response. Before we go, one more question for you.
Sure.
If you could work at any startup right now in whatever position you wanted, or even just, hey, I'm going to join the team and kind of be a groupie, what startup would you pick?
All the ones we've invested in.
All the ones you've invested in?
Well, by the way, I say that tongue in cheek, but it's also a little bit of a litmus test for what we invest in. Like, we invested in a company called Cuvée, which is making a next generation wine bottle. It's actually a connected device. It's kind of like a Keurig for wine. It's this beautiful stainless steel flat screen device. Stick a little cartridge in the back and pour wine. It's very, very cool. It hasn't launched yet, but count that as your preview. And I'm obviously very close to the founders, but to me, that would be so fun. Like, just the idea of building something in wine, like to get to meet all these wineries and get to deliver a product that hopefully will disrupt something that hasn't changed in, like, I think the monks ever, right? I mean, the wine bottle is like the oldest thing ever. I think the Egyptians were drinking from wine bottles. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a bad answer because that's not the only one. But, maybe put another way, the best time, like the companies that are growing really quickly and, not to mention outside even our portfolio, but the Airbnbs, Ubers, the Slacks, all these things. There's no greater feeling than that rocket ship. And I don't think I've ever been on quite a rocket ship at that close level to feel it. But I've been around some that are growing really quickly. But going back to the highs and lows, like, I would love to be in one of those without any of the lows, which is probably doesn't exist. But a company where things are going really well is a really fun and exciting place to be. A startup where things aren't going well is like, you might as well be in hell. Like, it is a hard place because you're so wrapped up in it. When things don't go well, and inevitably companies have, but like when things are really starting to struggle. So I know I've now turned a positive question into a negative, but that's where it's really tough. And I've been on both sides, and I think I would do anything to be on a rocket ship. But I also know that you have an equal chance, maybe not even equal, but you have an equal chance of being on a crash and burn, and that's the hard part.
Well, you let me know when you find the one that's just going up, okay?
Yeah.
Micah, I can't thank you enough for being here today. How can everyone stay up to date with you and the work you guys are doing at Founder Collective?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we've got a bunch of things. So my Twitter handle is @MicahJ1, and I host a podcast called Collective Wisdom, which you can find on iTunes or SoundCloud, and we release stuff every couple weeks where we interview different folks, kind of like what you're doing. And then we have a site where we've kind of aggregated a lot of our blogs and podcasts called collectivewisdom.io. So follow us at any of those places, and you can see the stuff we're thinking about, writing about, talking about.
You should all check it out. I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Micah.